very, very good evening to you, dear East Africans. Many thanks for joining us on yet another edition of BottomLine East Africa here on KTN News. Always a pleasure to have you tuned in. Here is where we take a look at stories that have been making headlines across the region. And from Uganda, later on, we will be joined by our reporter from Kampala, Solomon Serwanja, just to keep us up to speed with some of the issues that have been taking priority or that have been making headlines in Tanzania. Here in Kenya, Duncan Haimba will be speaking to us about what has been happening in the country, as well as we'll definitely be giving you more information about some of the issues that have been taking place this whole week in the East African region and beyond. My name is Akisa Wandera. I'll be taking you through the program. Many thanks for staying with us. Now, the Federal Republic of Somalia this morning made final submissions in a case at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, where it is accusing Kenya of unlawful occupation of its maritime border of the Indian Ocean. Somalia is accusing Kenya of unnecessarily prolonging a battle over lucrative Indian Ocean oil and gas reserves, despite Mogadishu's willingness to reach an amicable solution due to what it termed as good neighborliness. Here is part of Somalia's submissions.
Kenya has been a true friend of Somalia throughout its years of need. Kenya maintains a friend of Somalia. All that Kenya asserts is that the agreements must be performed in good faith. Somalia cannot repudiate its obligations and then portray itself as a victim of Kenya. The MOU sets out the agreed procedure for settling this dispute. It must be followed. And in the very unlikely event that its procedure fails to produce a negotiated settlement, then Part 15 procedures under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea would then come into operation. That too is an agreed procedure other than recourse to the court. That too falls squarely within Kenya's reservations to the court's jurisdiction.
Somalia has now abandoned its claim of nullity, but seeks instead to deprive the terms of the MOU of any legal effect. Mr. President, the MOU was initiated by Somalia and drafted and reviewed pursuant to the advice of a respected Norwegian diplomat. Prior to its signature, the MOU was approved by the President of Somalia, by the Prime Minister of Somalia, and by Somalia's Council of Ministers.
Now, let's still stick to The Hague, where on Monday, judges on Monday indicted Kenya for non-cooperation in the now terminated case of President Uhuru Kenyatta. The court found that Kenya had refused to provide important information requested by the prosecution. The judges have now referred Kenya to the Assembly of State Parties to decide Kenya's fate. But as our managing editor Joe Ageo reports, the action may have no immediate impact on the collapsed Kenyan cases. Take a look.
For nearly 5 years, the ICC case hung over President Uhuru Kenyatta as he became the first ever sitting head of state to face charges at the Hague-based court.
The case is at a critical juncture.
And for a good part of that period, the prosecution alleged that the government of Kenya was withholding evidence relating to Kenyatta's case.
We have not received material which might be regarded as the truly critical material. I don't want to rehearse submissions I've made before about the likelihood of somebody who is involved in offences wanting to cover their tracks.
I sent off communication to the Registrar of Companies. I sent out communication to the Communication Authority of Kenya, to Airtel, to Safaricom, to the Central Bank of Kenya, to the Kenya Revenue Authority, to the Ministry of Lands, to the National Intelligence Service, to the National Transport and Safety Authority. If we desired to delay or obstruct, there would have been no reason for me to commence these consultations.
Sitaki niseme mengi, nyinyi nyote mmejisikiliza, hakuna lolote.
In March last year, the court terminated the proceedings against the president after the prosecution withdrew the charges. but the prosecution insisted that it was because the state had refused to part with critical evidence. Now the court has finally come home with a verdict whose real weight remains unclear. This is because the chamber acknowledged that the materials sought by the prosecution were only relevant in the Kenyatta case, which has since been terminated. Still, the judges found that, quote, considering the relevance of the materials sought in the Kenyatta case, it is likely that such requests will be relevant for current or future investigations in the cases arising from the same situation. Adding, in any case, the chamber finds that, in general, the lack of bona fide cooperation, as shown by the Kenyan government in this instance, may have a serious impact on the functioning of the court in future proceedings. The case will now be referred to the Assembly of State Parties, a group of countries who are signatories to the Rome Statute, the international treaty that created the ICC. Many legal analysts say the finding may for the moment only be symbolic victory for the prosecution. But to the extent that it indicts the Kenyan government for non-cooperation, it could well be a new diplomatic headache in the coming months. Jogeo, KTN News.
And still in Kenya, the man who will become Kenya's Chief Justice was unveiled yesterday by the country's Judicial Service Commission. 64-year-old appellate judge David Kenani Maraga was nominated for the position of the top judge and his name forwarded to the president for appointment.
The Judicial Service Commission, after lengthy deliberation, recommended Honorable Mr. Justice David Kenani Maraga for appointment of a Chief Justice.
The announcement caught the Kenyan nation by surprise, signaling an end to a lengthy 19-day recruitment process to find Justice Dr. William Mutunga's successor. David Kenani Maraga emerged as the man given the nod by all 9 commissioners of the judicial body, who insisted he best displayed temperament needed to steer Kenya's judiciary well into the future.
We look for an individual who has outstanding jurisprudence, who has integrity and has stood out amongst his peers. We are looking for a candidate who will further the transformation agenda of the judiciary and to take the judiciary to the next level. We are looking for a candidate who will get judges, magistrates and judicial staff to work.
For a man who stood out during his interview with the commission, the selection of David Maraga as nominee to the position of Chief Justice may not have come as a surprise for pundits in the judicial realm, who had indicated that David, alongside Al Nasir Visram and Smoking Wanjala, outperformed other candidates seeking the same position.
It is not that Judge Maraga was a safe selection. No, he wasn't. He stood out, as I've said. And he stood out as that individual who will lead the judiciary and will ensure that the little issues that we've had in the Supreme Court end.
Justice David Maraga, a staunch Adventist who said that he would give up his job at the judiciary if he was forced to work on a Saturday, vowed to revive the program for helping the poor with court cases, as well as appoint a senior judge to head the judiciary's ombudsman's office.
If you look at my CV, I have been involved in building of churches in literally all over the country. From Kinango, Kitui, Nyamin, all these places.
The Judicial Service Commission has since forwarded Maraga's name to the office of the President. President Uhuru Kenyatta now has 14 days to submit Maraga's nomination to the National Assembly, who will in turn have 21 days to vet his suitability before casting a vote as to whether David Kenani Maraga will eventually assume the presidency of Kenya's judiciary. So for now, the Judicial Service Commission will be shifting its focus to selecting a suitable candidate for the Deputy Chief Justice of the judiciary of the country, even as the nation heads to a general election in which the country's judiciary is expected to play a monumental role. Timothy Otieno, KTN News.
Now, Duncan Hamber will be joining us later with more details on some stories like that has been done by Timothy Otieno that have been making headlines in Kenya. But now let's move to neighboring Uganda, where some opposition members in the Ugandan parliament have vowed to break away from their party should its leadership fail to reverse a decision that prohibits them from receiving the 150 million free Ugandan shillings each for buying cars. This as some legislators accuse their colleagues of being hypocrites by saying that they will not pick the free iPads and only to secretly sign for them from the Directorate of ICT at Parliament.
Committee of the Opposition Forum for Democratic Change FDC resolved not to allow their legislators to get the 150 million shillings money for cars, advising them to get this money on a loan scheme. The resolution appears to be backfiring.
Resolved that if members of the opposition, especially Forum for Democratic Change, if they must get cars, then it has to be a loan scheme.
And you see, these are the small things where you hear there is FDC 1 and FDC 2, and we'll even register another political party. In Kenya, there is four that's it. Where are we going? Do they know how many granaries I sold to come back to Parliament? Where was FDC? We will keep telling them. If they insist, we tell them. If they try to discipline us, we tell them. We can even form another political party. Because the opposition now is at its weakest. You don't even see the face of opposition in the House.
The FDC legislators, led by the former leader of opposition in Parliament, Professor Ogenga Latigo, say the FDC resolution is not friendly and can't bind them since they were never consulted before taking a decision.
If you have not put us down, and we have not sanctioned you to say anything, you cannot say that you are talking on our behalf.
And the management committee, what Honorable Semuju said, is what that committee actually took.
So we were not consulted, and for me, I will not be bound by it. Actually, Parliament is just delaying me. If they could hand over the vehicle, even yesterday, I would be a little happier.
Resolved that if members of the opposition, especially Forum for Democratic Change, if they must get cars, then it has to be a loan scheme.
People should know I'm the one passing in the constituency.
Meanwhile, some opposition legislators have lashed at their colleagues for being hypocrites and unpatriotic. This follows the Wednesday process of distributing the free iPads to each of the 431 lawmakers in the House, where a section of FDC legislators were of a view that all opposition members of Parliament should not pick the iPads, arguing that it's a wastage of taxpayers' money. But not even one day has passed that they moved away from their walk to talk, as information from the ICT Directorate at Parliament indicated the majority of them picked the iPads quietly.
That they are not going to pick iPad. They are going to pick them. That's what we call fantasy of the highest level. You predict an image outside so that you may please people that for you are special, you are different, when you are doing contrary.
Time will tell, and you know the analogy that time is the best judge. Time has told who was telling the truth and who was telling the lies. You have seen those who were in the media alleging that, you know, government is doing a bad thing to give out iPads, to give out cars. They are the very people who this morning picked these iPads, and you cross-checked and found out the names.
They also say this loose talk from their fellow colleagues has not only led to the loss of their integrity as members of Parliament, but also tainted the image of the August House.
All right, and that is just one of the stories that made headlines this week in Uganda. And now joining us with more details on that particular story and more is our reporter in Kampala, Uganda, Solomon Serwanja, who's joining us via phone for more details. A very good evening to you, Solomon. Many thanks for joining us here on BottomLine East Africa. Now, free iPads, free cars. It must have been a very interesting week in the Ugandan parliament.
Well, I tell you, yes, the August Assembly once again is on the spot. Just last week, of course, you know what happened last week. Again, the opposition under the Forum for Democratic Change divided over whether they should pick the cars. And actually, they will not be given cars. They will be given 150 million shillings for cars. Now, this is one of the entitlements for members of Parliament. And the 431 members of Parliament will receive 150 million shillings to facilitate them with vehicles to go to their different constituencies and pick different views from the different people to come to the August Assembly eventually to legislate on different laws. But again, the Forum for Democratic Change Party, which is also the party for key opposition leader here in Uganda, Dr. Kizza Besigye, wants its members of parliament who are from that party to just take the money on loan rather than just picking it up. And you've had reactions, some members saying it cannot happen. We are members of parliament and we deserve this money. So it's the position of Forum for Democratic Change. We are not party to that, and we can even go ahead and form other parties. Well, I can tell you, Akisa, the opposition is at its weakest point, especially regarding to the members of parliament. Very many of them are saying they will pick the money and they will use that money to buy vehicles to facilitate them. Of course, the issue of the iPads. I mean, iPads are also a soft loan. Members of parliament here in Uganda are given by the Parliamentary Commission iPads so that they can be able to follow the proceedings in the August Assembly rather than read papers, piles and piles of paper. It's a grant. It's sort of a grant that is eventually paid back by members of parliament. And the opposition, again, is saying do not receive that. And within the opposition itself, some of them said we will not take iPads. Others are going in hiding to pick the iPads. Eventually, it makes the opposition look very bad in the eyes of the public, Akisa.
Now, with the accusations and counter-accusations that we're seeing from the legislators in the Ugandan parliament, is this in fine print that it's going to happen? Are we going to see them vote for these particular ideas, or what's going to happen? Just give us a clear description of what we expect probably next week from the same issue.
Well, you'll be sure that this story will continue to make headlines because the Parliamentary Commission has said that it's going to give money, 150 million shillings, to these different legislators next week or early October. So that eventually means that both the opposition and the NRM members of parliament will receive this money. Whether indeed some members of the opposition will not take that money is just a question of time. But majority of them will pick that money. This whole discussion as to whether the members from the opposition should get this money or not, in my own opinion, feeds into the narrative of the huge expenditure of the August Assembly. Think about it, Akisa, 150 million shillings given to every member of parliament. That is 431 members of parliament who receive this money. Of course, this is literally double the amount that the members of parliament in the 9th parliament received. And so when you look at the monies that will be spent, many Ugandans feel, is it fair that you can give members of parliament this money, yet the Uganda's education and health sector are still struggling? And of course, Akisa, let me bring it to your attention. Government of Uganda has an estimated 1.7 billion shillings on two people, that is the Deputy Speaker and the Speaker of Parliament, on vehicles. Now, Rebecca Kadaga, who is Speaker of Parliament here in Uganda, has a Mercedes-Benz which is estimated to cost about 600 million shillings. She has a Land Cruiser V8 which is like costing 200 million shillings, plus a fleet of other vehicles that support her. And she's also a Member of Parliament, so she's also entitled to 150 million shillings. So, and that the same applies for the Deputy Speaker. And so, Akisa, you're looking at 7 billion shillings to two people. Ugandans we spend that money elsewhere and reduce on these huge expenditures that you're spending on luxurious vehicles. On the other hand, however, Akisa, I want to play the devil's advocate here. Members of Parliament who come from like far-reaching regions in Karamoja, in Sebei sub-region, as far as Uganda, it is not easy to get there. And so you expect that they deserve these vehicles to go ahead and opinions and views from there. Question is, when they're giving money, do they even buy the vehicles?
Solomon, now, of course, the situation there is not quite different from what we get not only in Kenya but also in other African countries on when those elected go in for their own personal interests. But quickly, what else has made headlines in Uganda this week?
Well, another big story, Akisa, World Bank cancelling its, loan to Uganda. It's quite very shocking news, especially that Uganda partly depends on donations, grants and loans from different stakeholders, particularly the World Bank. Is very angry that the money that they gave to Uganda, about 1.5 trillion shillings, has remained unused. That means it has accumulated interest over the years That is so much. And so the World Bank is very, very angry at Uganda that, I mean, we give you loans, but you do not use the money that we give you. You know, you ask loans for infrastructure development, you ask loans for building schools and bettering the education of Uganda, but that money still lies in the coffers of the Ugandan government. And so it is the World Bank. Now, Uganda is appealing against that decision and saying, look, we had some few issues to sort, but we will certainly use this money. And so the World Bank's decision to, giving Uganda loans, which of course come in at a lower interest because it is pretty much for development, is really, really, really going to take Uganda's development a bit a step back. Because certainly you and I can agree that the World Bank is very significant in the development of a nation.
Solomon, thank you very much for speaking to us. Always a pleasure. Solomon Serwanja is our correspondent joining us from Kampala, Uganda, with details of some of the things that have made headlines in Uganda this week. And still on Bottom Line East Africa, let's now bring in our senior political reporter, Duncan Haemba, just to keep us up to speed with some of the things that have been happening in Kenya this week. A very good evening to you, Duncan. Many thanks for joining us on Bottom Line East Africa. I know we have a lot of issues. We could definitely start with the nomination of David Kenani Maraga for the position of Chief Justice. Then we go to the political temperature in the country as of now. Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Akisa. Of course, it has been a busy week, but I think the anxiety that Kenyans were having actually basically on who could be Chief Justice, Justice Willy Mutunga's successor is now over. And I don't think there will be much anxiety given that it's automatic. The Deputy Chief Justice will not be a man. And therefore, it is now easier for Kenyans to try and now look at the number of ladies who applied for that job in that category, because for Justice David Maraga, it's as good as it's done and dusted, because you don't expect anything that maybe go contrary to what the JSC has arrived at. So maybe it's just that formal process that the president will have to send his name to Parliament for vetting, then Parliament will come debate, and then they approve. Unless if they reject is when now we can go back to the drawing board, but chances are almost nil, given the stakes that are high, both outside judiciary and inside the judiciary. So I think for that matter, it's as good as a done deal. Justice David Maraga is the CJ designate.
All right. And away from that, there's been a lot of issues on the political front. People are ditching their parties for other parties. We saw a launch of a merger or a merging of small parties into one big party called the Jubilee Party. We have the opposition in the coast, of course, in search of votes. Just tell us the key highlights of what has been happening in the world of politics in Kenya this week.
Well, what has, I think, caught many by surprise is the move by ODM party. It's among the parties that suffered heavy political casualty 2 weeks ago when Jubilee Party launched. Remember that nearly over 40 members, elected leaders, and we're only talking about maybe MPs and governors and senators, and not MCS that crossed the floor or switched allegiance from the parties that sponsored them to their current political status to Jubilee in favor of Jubilee. So when, remember, for instance, Gideon Mungaro, his Kilifi counterpart, Mustafa Eid, Kwale Woman Rep, Zainab Chizuga, they've been rebels for a while. Years. ODM has never been in a hurry to maybe take action and maybe de-whipping them and deregister them as members. But I think this week when the party's disciplinary committee issued, send letters to the said members that they have to respond within 7 days is what perhaps will has come out as the biggest political news. Remember on Monday and Tuesday actually, the Wiper Party, which is also a victim of that political crossover, had also said that the members who have switched their allegiance in favor of Jubilee Party should do what is honorable to them instead of continuing to earn what they call the immoral pay, because they are no longer maybe subscribing to the ideals of their sponsor party. Then they should resign. But Wiper was not very straightforward. It's ODM that has asked the MPs, 13 of them, to respond within 7 days, which elapse on Tuesday next week. So that is what is causing political shivers. And among the 13, I think one of them who has the hardest political life is nominated Member of Parliament Isaac Mwaura. Remember, for you to be nominated by a party, you have to strictly adhere to what the party says. You play a certain role as per the expectations of the party. You are not elected, you are nominated. And therefore, for him to be deregistered, it can even take like right now, and he has no legal basis to contest. For the elected members of parliament, they can, if they feel that they don't want to, they are not ready to face a by-election, they can contest, which means they might have to appear before a disciplinary committee if that is the route that will be followed, and if they feel they are not given fair hearing, they can contest at the political parties tribunal. However, talking to some of the legal minds within the political circle, they were saying, in this aspect, it's very clear. In fact, the party only needs to notify the register of political parties and the speakers of the respective houses, be it the county assembly or the National Assembly or the Senate, that these members have gone against the party ideals. And as such, we feel that they are no longer part of us. But it's the speakers that are supposed to write to the register of political parties and say these members have expressed or have clearly indicated they are no longer part of their sponsor parties, and as such, their seats need to be registered, to be declared vacant. So that is part of the political heat that we are having. And I remember I was engaging a senior counsel and was saying, most probably, Akisa, this could be reminiscent of what happened in 1966, 69, thereabout, when many members within KANU actually resigned in favor of Kenya People's Union, and there was a mini general election. So if that happens, because the number is almost over 40, then it's as good as a mini election towards 2017.
Well, even as we talk about politics, we cannot really go away without mentioning the one man who hoped and took weeks to land. And yesterday we had the launch of the Labour Party of Kenya. How is this expected to go? Just give us a brief report on what we expect from this LPK. What exactly is the game plan?
I think for that party, and I think that party, we are looking at one person specifically that you've said, he hoped and he took longer to land, and therefore he was maybe hanging in the atmosphere. People didn't know when he lands which spot will he land on the ground, but finally he has landed in the name of Labour Party of Kenya as the party leader. But I think the shock is the fact that he appears to be an isolated leader right now, or a lone ranger. Remember when he engineered that resignation of fellow party officials, they were a big team, and he was being cheered from all corners, and they told him, please, it's not necessary. But now, in the formation of his new party, he's actually all alone, because when you look at the people that attended that launch, you cannot actually be able to pinpoint any other sitting member of parliament who would have even graced the launch as a sign of solidarity. So that is also something that has caught many with a shock. And remember that he's a politician who's known to be courting controversy and all that. And therefore, like just when he resigned, it was like big news. And the launch would have been big news, but the fact that it was low-key as it is, many are saying perhaps he needs to redo his homework again if he wants to remain afloat and be a force to reckon with where we are headed, Akisa.
All right, thank you very much, Duncan, for that. Politics of Kenya, we're just 10 months shy from the 2017 general election. It's definitely going to get more interesting. Duncan Haimba there, keeping us up to speed with some of the things that the media, or some of the things that have taken center stage this week in Kenya. Well, at this point, let's take a short commercial break. Do not go too far. We still have a lot lined up for you here on Bottom Line East Africa.